Deputy Niamh Smyth.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach. Minister, I too, being a Deputy of the constituency of Cavan Monaghan, have obviously received a number of phone calls over the last 2 days of very distressed citizens and also very distressed farmers who really find themselves in similar situations in terms of financial difficulty. As we know, this is an issue for farmers right across the island, not just in our constituency, but the big, I suppose, concern after yesterday's events is that this is something that has set a precedence for the future. There are citizens right across the country facing evictions, facing repossessions, and again, what is the protocol? Is this the type of behaviour that I could only describe as Wild West behaviour to be something that we can think that could possibly happen to citizens and their families and in communities again in the future? As we know, farmers are on their knees at the moment in terms of pricing and lots of issues that affect them and their income, which most of them, of course, are to the pin of their collar in terms of income and getting very difficult to survive. And lots of them, as I said, find themselves in financial difficulty in trying to deal with the banks. But they need reassurance today. They need reassurance that this will not be the procedures that will be taken, this heavy-handed, Wild West conduct in the future. So I'm looking forward to hearing, Minister, what you have to say, and particularly in the events that happened in my own constituency in Monaghan yesterday. Thank you.
Deputy, thank you. Minister, you have 4 minutes.
Thanks very much, Cathaoirleach. On behalf of the Taoiseach who can't be here this evening due to official business, I want to thank the deputies for raising this matter on the floor of the Dáil.
Are there copies of those replies, Minister?
Pardon?
Is there copies of your replies?
Yes, they're on the way, I would expect, yeah. I think deputies should be very careful in rushing to judgment about this case or operating on the assumption that the various agencies involved, the official assignee, the Defence Forces, the Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine and the Garda Síochána would have undertaken the action in question as anything other than a matter of last resort and in the public interest. The House will appreciate that it would not be appropriate for me to comment in detail here on the affairs of third parties who have been the subject of proceedings. The inevitable consequence of this, unfortunately, is that I cannot put on the record of the House the full facts surrounding the case. However, I can say that some of the public comment about the case, and in particular offensive suggestions have been made about the role of the Defence Forces, has no basis in reality. The Defence Forces carried out the humane cull of 5 animals on a farm in County Monaghan due to a significant concern for public safety. It is not correct, as has been alleged, that the cattle were treated inhumanely or that this case involves the operation of debt collectors. This operation was carried out at the request of the official assignee in bankruptcy who is responsible for the herd of cattle on that farm, and it was done in conjunction with Garda Síochána and with the Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine, as well as with the Defence Forces. While there is a long history to this particular case, I can inform deputies that following failed efforts to round up the 5 remaining animals, and with a significant concern about public safety, on 4th of July last, and at the request of the official assignee, a decision was taken involving the Gardaí, the official assignee and the Department of Agriculture and Food that the optimal course of action was that these animals should be culled. The protocol between the Department of Agriculture and the Department of Defence was invoked, and the animals were culled by Army personnel in line with that protocol. I am aware that the official assignee has said publicly that the decision to proceed in the way he did in relation to the cattle was made very reluctantly and was made in the interest of public safety of the local community. It should also be noted that this was a TB restricted herd. The Minister for Agriculture, Food and Marine has confirmed that the carcasses of the 5 cattle have been removed and are now excluded from the food chain. For the information of deputies, it is relevant to recall the status of the official assignee and the specific statutory duties which he has to discharge. The official assignee in bankruptcy is an officer of the court, as provided at Section 66 of the Bankruptcy Acts, and as such is independent in the performance of his duties. However, in doing so, he is required under the Bankruptcy Act 1988 to observe and obey such directions as are given to him by the court. Obviously, the bankruptcy assignee is also subject to all laws of the state. The official assignee also has specific statutory responsibilities and duties under the Bankruptcy Acts. Firstly, when a person is adjudicated bankrupt, all of his or her assets transfer to the official assignee under Section 44 of the Act.
I'll give you the time, Minister. There's no need.
Thank you. The primary duties of the official assignee under Section 61(2) of the Act are to get in and realise the property, to ascertain the debts and liabilities, and to distribute the assets in accordance with the provisions of the Act. However, the transfer of the assets of the official assignee also has the important consequence that the duties, as well as the rights of the bankrupt person, transfer to the official assignee along with the assets. This assignee, for instance, can be sued for any breach of legal obligations arising from these assets, just as the bankrupt person could have been. For example, when a person who owns a herd of cattle becomes bankrupt, the ownership of the cattle transfers to the official assignee. However, the duties associated with those cattle also transfer to the official assignee, including responsibility for their registration, for testing for tuberculosis, and for compliance with Department of Agriculture certification required for removing cattle. The House will therefore appreciate that the official assignee has particular legal responsibilities to discharge. It is clear, Deputies, that very specific and difficult circumstances arose in this case, and that it was a matter for the official assignee to discharge his legal responsibilities as best he could in those difficult circumstances. In doing so, he relied on the services of other state agencies who performed their functions in accordance with their remit. It is clear from the comments which he has made, and after consulting with various agencies, that he did not believe any alternative viable strategy could be adopted. The House will, moreover, appreciate that cases where the official assignee is discharging his legal responsibilities as an officer of the court are not ones in which it would be appropriate or open to the Taoiseach to intervene. I accept, of course, that it is a matter of regret that it did not prove possible to dispose of the cattle in another manner. I hope Deputies can appreciate that the actions taken in this case by the various agencies involved would not have been taken lightly, or where realistic alternatives existed. Thank you.
Thanks, Minister. Deputy Ferris, you have 2 minutes.
Margaret, and thank you, Minister, for your response. I have to say on the outset, it's what I expected. I had no doubt coming in here that the response I was going to get was going to be one that answered none of the questions that were asked. It says that an optimal course of action was that these animals should be culled. Should be culled. So 5 emmets and heifers were shot dead by Defence Force ministers at the request of the official assignee. And it's done under the pretext of safety. Now, you could tell that to people who know nothing about rural Ireland and nothing about farming. But you come from rural Ireland and you know very well I'm telling the truth here. Any man or woman worth their salt that lives in farming and works in farming can't tell me that you can't get 5 animals into a yard and get them loaded onto a trailer or onto a cattle truck. That is the reality of it. And also you say in it here that this herd was restricted, was a TB restricted herd. Can I ask you, was the person who owned the land, Michael Hoey, was he served with a restriction order? Because we need to know that. Michael Hoey, he says he was not locked down. He tested in last December, they passed the test in December, and all of a sudden he's restricted. Is that restriction come from the 30 cattle that were taken previously and had been tested and obviously killed and obviously retested? So, as I sitting here just thinking about this, a family farm, armed men coming into his farm, shooting 5 of his cattle dead, after confiscating his 30 herd before that, along with what happened to Tommy Collins down in Clare, where the state is being used as an agent of the assignee in order to implement what the assignee wants done. And that's what's happening here. So I'm not getting answers, but I want to see an independent inquiry and investigation into this. Carried out, you can apply the guard superintendent or whatever, but be carried out to ascertain the facts here. Because this is not acceptable. This is wrong. And it was wrong in Tommy Collins' case in County Clare, and it's wrong here.
Deputy Clare Daly, you have 2 minutes.
Well, the Minister might be surprised, but I can actually appreciate his comments and where he's coming from, actually, in terms of this issue. I would be prepared to say I find it unbelievable that the information that's in the public domain is the full story, and I happy is the wrong word to say that I think the whole instance is entirely unsatisfactory, but I hear what you're saying in terms of the legal responsibility of the official assignee. That he or she must discharge their duties and have certain legal obligations. I've heard his comments which said that he did that and that he wouldn't have anything necessarily to gain by wilfully destroying the cattle in this way. However, and I do genuinely make those points, however, this information is in the public domain. It has caused enormous disquiet from farmers to people being threatened by the banks to animal welfare lovers everywhere, to people who get concerned about the manner in which the state discharges its duties. And those points are just going to have to be answered. Now, you said that it's in particular that the offensive suggestions which have been made about the role of the Defence Forces have no basis in reality. Well, I don't know what those offensive suggestions are. The information that's out there is that these were shot while running around the field in a willfully uncoordinated way, rather than a proper, only humane way to kill cat is a single bowl to the head. So that's not, if that's true, and the information is there, well then that's not offensive. That's inappropriate action by the Defence Forces, and it has to be investigated. We talk about a protocol between the Department of Agriculture and the Department of Defence. We need more information on that. We do need the answers as to the health of that herd and what state it was in. That's a very important issue. What were the public safety issues that were called into being that we needed to send in the army? How often is the army sent in these cases? These are very valid questions that people need to be answered, and I know we can't, and they're out there now and they're not going to go away. So I would actually support the call of Deputy First that we have some form of independent investigation into this and to the wider use of state forces in these scenarios.
Thank you, Deputy. Niamh Smyth.
Thank you very much, Gareth. Minister, I accept most of what you're saying here. But what I take issue with is the conduct, and I'm repeating myself, and I don't like to be repeating myself. I accept what you're saying here in terms of the role that the agencies had to do, the role that they were given to do, and all of that. I am really having to reiterate myself here when I say it's the manner of the culling of these animals. I have never heard, I don't come from a farming background, but I'm sure I would have heard of something like this before. I have never heard of the manner in which this was done before. And what really aggrieves me is to think, and of course it is within the media reports, that there was family within earshot of gunshots on the farmyard. Perhaps his son is what I've heard today. And I just really don't think that that kind of behaviour is acceptable. If there was a child in earshot of gunshots, people, you know, racing around a farmyard, it paints a very, very poor picture of society in Ireland in 2016.
Thank you, Deputy. Thanks very
much. First of all, I want to thank the deputies for raising this matter, and I acknowledge the concerns expressed by deputies here this evening. We are all concerned that cattle should be treated humanely, and some inaccurate comments in circulation have undoubtedly contributed to the level of public concern. I would underline, however, that it is clear from the facts that this is a very, very exceptional case, where 5 cattle from a herd which was restricted due to tuberculosis were culled as a last resort due to very specific circumstances. The cattle were at the time in the ownership of the official assignee in bankruptcy, into whose name the herd had been transferred. The official assignee was responsible for health and safety matters relating to the cattle and for compliance with relevant Department of Agriculture regulations, including regarding tuberculosis. The culling was carried out by trained army personnel in the presence of An Garda Síochána and in accordance with the detailed protocols in operation between the Department of Agriculture and the Department of Defence. It followed extensive and ongoing consultation between the assignee, the Department of Agriculture, the Garda Síochána and the Department of Defence. As I indicated, it would not be appropriate for me to comment on matters relating to third parties, and in particular an individual involved in this case. I will note, however, that in his previous comments the assignee indicated that there were reasons why it was not possible to remove the cattle or to contain them by other means. In conclusion, I would underline that the culling of cattle is considered as exceptional and a last resort by all the public bodies concerned, and that this is an exceptional and complex case with particular facts. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister.